I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Imagine living in a country where your country has no critical resources, but you need it to advance your country. Even if some country has it, they monopolize and they sell it in a high price. Now, but if your country is poor or developing country, you might not be able to enjoy the maximum advantage of a technology investment. And if you're a country with the critical resources, you will certainly imagine where your country will suffer. Where this debate is about whether critical resources should be governed by international material agencies or their own country. Now, why is it important? This is important because critical resources affect literally everyone's daily life and survival. Things like energy, water, medicine ingredients, semiconductor materials, fertilizer for food, and rare minerals for technology are the backbone of the modern society. So if these resources are controlled unfairly, the whole world becomes unstable. So without global coordination, rich continues keep getting stronger. Poorer countries stay dependent, prices become unstable, and conflicts become more likely. The people who suffer most are usually ordinary citizens, like higher food prices, food shortages, unemployment, inflation, or even like humanitarian crisis. Now, what is wrong with the status quo? Right now, rich countries and giant corporations control most important resources, right? So poor countries often get exploited because they sell raw materials cheaply, but they still stay poor. So countries fight over resources which leads to war and political pressures. So during crisis, countries hoard supplies for themselves first. So the world becomes unstable because everyone competes aggressively. Let's take an example here. During shortage chips like oil or vaccines, or powerful countries bought huge amounts of first, while weaker countries struggled badly. So actually, the world has organizations that can regulate certain resources. For example, organization of the petroleum exporting countries for oil, International Atomic Energy Agency for nuclear materials, or the World Trade Organization for the trade rules. But the problem is the power is limited. Their coverage is narrow and they cannot strongly intervene when countries act selfishly. For example, OPEC mostly protects oil-producing countries' interests, and the IAEA focuses mainly on nuclear safety. WTO regulates trade generally but cannot fully stop resources holding or unfair dominance. So in the status quo, regulation exists, but it is fragmented and weak. Countries still prioritize nationalism and competition over global stability. So what is the motion trying to fix here? The motion wants to fix where unfair distribution of resources wars, exploitation of developing countries, global instability, and dependency on powerful states. Instead of whoever is the strongest gets everything, we move toward cooperation and fair access to every single country. So the goal for the government team is that we want a stronger international system that can actually coordinate critical resources globally, intervene during shortage or crisis, prevent monopoly and exploitation, and ensure resources are instead of competitive. So the goal is to make the global resources management cooperative instead of competitive. So the world becomes more global, less exploitative, and less likely to experience resource-driven conflict. And our burden is to prove our goal. Now, let's go to the first argument, where the status quo creates a dangerous and an unfair world. Now, let's go to our root problem, where right now important resources are controlled mostly by powerful countries and huge companies, not by the world together. Things like oil, gas, fertilizer, semiconductor materials, and rare earth minerals are needed by every country to survive and grow. But because there is no strong global system controlling them fairly, countries become selfish. They think, if I control more resources, I became stronger. I can become richer and stronger. So resources are no longer treated as things for human survival. They become political weapons and economic tools. That is very dangerous because the countries with the most power can decide who gets the resources, who suffers shortages, and who stays dependent. Now, let's go to our first mechanism, where unfair distribution creates a huge inequality. Rich countries can buy and secure resources much faster because they have more energy, they have more money, and they have they're stronger companies, they have stronger political influence and a better technology. Poorer countries cannot compete. So when shortage happen, rich countries often take huge amounts first, while weaker countries struggle badly. So let's take an example here. When imagine during an energy crisis, a rich country buys millions of oil barrels and stores them for safety. But poorer countries cannot afford the higher prices anymore. So what actually happens here? Electricity prices rise, transportation becomes expensive, food prices increase, and ordinary people suffer. So the problem is people are not suffering because resources do not exist. They suffer because access is unfair. Even worse, countries that own the resource still stay poor sometimes. So the problem is people are not suffering because resources do not exist. They suffer because access is unfair. Even worse, that countries that own the resources still stay poor sometimes. Now, let's take an example for our first mechanism here. A developing country may have like lithium mines needed for electric cars. Foreign companies come in, extract the lithium, gain most of the profit, and leave pollution behind. Meanwhile, local workers stay unpaid, communities stay poor, and the country remains dependent. So the status quo creates a cycle where rich countries keep becoming richer, poor countries keep supplying raw materials, but they never truly grow. So this is exploitation. Now let's go to our second mechanism, where competition over resources creates global instability, where because resources are so important, countries become extremely competitive when storages happen. Government panic because without resources, economic slow down, factories stop, prices rise, and citizens get angry. So countries start acting selfishly, like hoarding their supplies, banning exports, and pressuring weaker nations, or using resources as a politic trust. Now, let's take an example here. Imagine if one country controls most semiconductor materials. If conflict happens, they can limit exports. Suddenly, phones becomes very expensive. Car factory stops, technology industry crash, and unemployment rises globally. So one resource problem can affect the whole entire world. So the impact here is that status quo creates this unfairness, exploitation, dependency, global instability, and conflict. Ordinary people suffer the most with higher price, shortage, and unemployment, and economic crisis. That is why we need a stronger international material agency. Instead of the strongest countries take everything, we create a world where resources are managed fairly, crises are coordinated globally, and the countries cooperate instead of fighting. Now let's go to our second argument, where better environmental sustainability. So let's go to our root problem. Right now, countries and corporations compete aggressively to extract as many resources as possible, because resources mean money, political power, and economic growth. Since there is no strong global authority controlling extraction fairly, many actors prioritize short-term profit over long-term environmental protection. The mindset becomes take as much as possible before someone else does. This creates a massive environmental damage. Let's go to our first mechanism, where the status quo encourages over extraction, where because countries are competing with each other, they rush all the time. They rush to mine, drill, and exploit resources very aggressively. So companies also want maximum profit quickly, so they often cut environmental protections, ignore sustainability, and exploit weaker countries with weak regulations. For example, a country with rare earth minerals may allow huge mining projects because it desperately needs money. Foreign companies enter and destroys forests, pollute rivers, damage farmland, and leave toxic waste behind. After the resources are gone, local communities are left with environmental destruction, with cooperation, and move on. I am from the government team, proud to propose.